All right, hello, welcome to this video. Thanks for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos, welcome back. If you have, my intention is unity and oneness and the highest levels of love light. It's been a minute. There's been a lot going on in my reality, so I'll just give a little energy update, and go into some flow from there and kind of see where this goes. Wow, where do I begin? There are so many things that are unraveling in the current, in our current world series, we could say, in our currency, in our world and the currents that we are connected into, that we are essentially creating within these bandwidths. And many of us are remembering aspects of ourselves. Many of us are really processing a lot right now, myself included. One of the things that I was essentially shown is that I'm in this space of, the word that comes through is remnants. So a lot of people are having remnants of their immediate past or their childhood or things that they're processing. And what I always come back to is it's compost. We're essentially gathering these remnants, these leftovers, and we're not letting them go to waste. And so many of us are reviewing or having life reviews in which we are reconnecting with old friends, fill in the blanks, whatever it might be for you. And it's giving us the opportunity to now see that person, place, or thing, that experience, that workplace, that event, have that memory again of something that may have happened from our past. And we're being gifted the opportunity to see it from a different perspective. We're being gifted the opportunity to feel it in a different way, to feel the resonance in that experience or memory in a different way and from a different perspective. And for some people that can be confusing. We have this tendency to think that we should be feeling or reacting a certain way, and we're not. And that can make some people feel less of themselves because they are locked into patterns of, this is how I act, this is how I interact with the world, this is how I show up. But we're, from one perspective, all showing up differently, moment to moment. And when we come into this place of going, well, I'm not reacting the way that I should be, from another perspective, that can just be a form of resistance, a resistance to the new you, the new view as the new you is what my guides tell me. I also want to touch briefly on ascension symptoms, because this is kind of, I've seen be a subject in the spiritual community. And I'm just going to go there. There's a group of many beings who have been on this journey for quite some time, or they've gone on this journey of ascension, awakening, whatever you want to label it as, so strongly and so quickly that they're such a different person than they were a year ago. And there are some that are within that group, and I'm not even going to put it in one group because not everybody feels the exact same way, but they're over the idea of needing to process things a certain way. They've already reached that peak or that potential in their field. And what I've been called to share with everyone, that my guides keep telling me, is that we're all in different experiences. What shows up for me in my reality and how I experience it and how I express it can be completely different than what shows up in your reality and how you experience it and how you express it. Therefore, I may understand that ascension symptoms from one perspective are me being in resistance to the changes that are happening within my body, within my architecture, within my blueprint, within the structure of our reality. Yet that doesn't make that experience any less valid. And that's what I'm just going to share with that, because more and more what I'm called to bring up is acceptance. Acceptance isn't just about me accepting what's going on in my body. It's acceptance that other people are going to be in their journey, and that's going to look different for them than it might look for me. And while I may have already experienced a certain amount of realization, awakening, processing, and I now know that that's no longer relevant for my experience now, it's no longer relevant for my growth, it doesn't mean that somebody else may not need to still experience that. And we're really being called to come into a place of that. Are we in resistance to what others might be experiencing, how others might be expressing? I get in resistance. Sometimes I don't like hearing the stories, but that isn't for me to decide the stories that somebody else is going to tell. And that's been part of my journey and awareness of recognizing when I'm in resistance to what somebody else is expressing. That gives me a mirror to look back and say, okay, well, I don't agree with what they're saying, but that also means that I don't have to feed it by needing to address it or converse with it or rap back and forth about it, because that's not necessarily where I want to focus my attention and my time. That doesn't mean, though, that that other person doesn't want to, that they may want to focus their attention and time there. And while it may be a waste of their time from our perspective, what my guidance team keeps telling me is that that's their time. They're on their dime. And I can choose whether or not I plug into that message, whether or not I plug in and relate with that particular story. And this branches out to everything. It trickles out to everything, because we have this group of individuals that are all collectively commingling together, AKA humanity. And it's a very interesting dynamic that we're in right now, because again, I'm being called to go back to the remnants. We still have remaining pieces that are floating around, that are being called or attracted to us, or that we're pulling away from, or that we're reincorporating into our reality, that are still useful for the entirety of our experience, if that makes sense. So I just went into like 3 different topics here, but bottom line, or top of the line, the message is generally that acceptance doesn't just mean accepting our role or our reality or our journey or what we have come to know as the truth. It's also recognizing that others have to come to that acceptance on their own. And when we are in resistance about other people and where they're at, that's on us. And it's a good opportunity for us when we feel that, because I feel it too. I have certain people in my life that really are called over and over again to experience the same habits, the same cycles, the same patterns. And ultimately, that's on them. As soon as I come into a place where I'm triggered by it, I'm triggered by the choices that they're making in their life that don't really affect me. That's when it's mine to work through from my perspective. But in addition to that, I hear a collective body saying, but Carrie, if they're making choices, that has a ripple effect, and it creates a ripple effect on the whole collective. And that is true. So in essence, they are having an impact on our entire reality that we share together. And so I can see and feel into why some may be frustrated that there's a large group of beings, humans, light workers, whatever we want to label ourselves as, that are not letting go of this past, letting go of old patterns, letting go of the old stories. And that can be frustrating for those of us who are on this journey, who are trying to assist in clearing all of that. Yet at the same time, we are still in the process of integrating everything, which also includes letting go of what no longer serves us. But many of us are in that, working on a different framework, a different timeline, we could say. We're sharing this timeline together, but the way I experience time is different than how someone else may experience and therefore interpret time and their experience as they go through time. Does that make sense? So the more we can come into a place of acceptance and recognizing that they may not want to let go of that pattern right now, they may never want to let go of that pattern, the more we're able to attune our own energy to what needs to be done for us. The more we let go of needing to create a reality based on what this other person is experiencing. So it's like I'm being shown again, square peg, round hole. I have been told so many times by people that my job is to wake people up. And I would say from one perspective, that's true. Yet from another perspective, that isn't necessarily the entirety of the truth, because that's one little piece of what we feel is true for us in the now moment. But when we take a step back and look at the whole picture, we recognize again that that isn't my job or anyone else's job. And I could go into this more because I know there's people out there going, no, that's my mission. That's why I came here, was to wake up humanity. And again, I agree with that. But the question becomes, how are we doing that? And is that our only mission? And again, what is a mission really? And can it change? What if humanity is already at the level that they need to be at for us to move forward, yet we're hanging on to the idea that humanity needs to wake up before we can move forward? I could go into so many different layers here. Or we're hanging on to the idea that humanity needs to understand certain concepts before they can fully wake up. Or we're hanging on, or in resistance to, the idea that that person's beliefs are not accurate, therefore it's slowing down the awakening process of humanity. I would venture to say that that is true to some extent, yet it isn't really true, because we are all here experiencing through our own journey. And if we're doing what we need to do in order to experience and express in a creative love format, that person's journey is not necessarily relevant to our own mission. Because if each of us were focusing on our mission at hand, which is our own growth, our own creative expression, that has a ripple effect individually on the collective. And therefore, those individuals who are not able to express, not able to find their truth, not realizing that they're having this, let's say, lower impact, that's even the right word because that puts it in a hierarchy. But let's say you have someone who's in a constant hamster wheel and they just won't get off that cycle. Rather than us focusing our attention on that one person or that one collective of people telling them how we feel they should be experiencing their experience, instead we create a field in which those who are confused, those who are lost, those who are unaware of their potential can feel into the field. They can tap into it, even if only for a moment. But the more that happens, the more their frequency makes the adjustments just by us being the ones that have that ripple effect. So this goes back to the question I had with somebody asked, and they said, well, that ripple effect is having a negative impact on the collective. Yes, but we are countering that by our positive effect or our more balanced and aligned flow that essentially dissipates the lower frequencies. It dissolves them. So ultimately, what I'm sharing in this little energy update is that it comes back to us and our own individual unique expression in sovereignty. And that other person who we might be focusing on or worried about, or we've gotten to a point of being over. People get, oh, I'm so over this, or I'm so over that. Well, if we're so over it, then I guess we wouldn't be talking about it. Although it is relevant to discuss some of the things, such as, let's go back to ascension symptoms, or let's go back to, we'll start focus on that just for a moment. They're not necessary to some people. To some people, they're very necessary. For some of us, we've already experienced all of that. And it becomes, if you're working with someone or you know someone who's been going through this journey for the last 20 years of their life, it can be challenging to meet someone else where they're at. They know nothing about nothing. You know nothing, Jon Snow. They don't understand that there's multidimensionality. They don't understand that the heart has a brain, that the gut has a brain. They don't understand what a chakra is. But they're open to learning and feeling into that. And sometimes they don't need to know any of that to have an even bigger ripple effect on the collective than those that do know the information. Because if we're showing up and we know all of this information, but we're not really leading by example in the purity of love and forgiveness and compassion and appreciation and gratitude and acceptance of someone else and where they're at, we're not meeting them where they're at, and we're forcing them or pushing them or making them feel bad for them not being where we are, that changes the frequency and the energy around it. And we actually have less of a ripple effect. We lower our frequency into this other space and we create from that space. The other thing I wanted to address on that note is if someone is a spiritual teacher, and this is where we're going to that next level, I do see a group of spiritual teachers who are teaching from this space. And ultimately, that's their choice. Again, I can choose whether or not to tune in to that energy or that frequency. And I feel strongly from my own perspective that by me accepting that spiritual teacher as being frustrated and seeing that within my own self and my own journey, that assists the collective in transmuting that frequency into acceptance, into gratitude, into appreciation. Because we all do it. We all wiffle waffle. We all have moments that we feel frustrated, or we feel that we're the ones on the hamster wheel, that we're the ones stuck in a habit pattern or a cycle. So again, it all comes back to this not separating ourselves so much and putting these stories into compartments and putting expectations. I had a friend who shared some information with me, and I had been frustrated because someone in my life wasn't taking care of themselves. They just go through these cycles and these patterns where they end up sick because they are focusing on the wrong things that they've been focusing on for years. From my perspective, I say wrong. Is it wrong? Again, that's me not accepting that they are unavailable in certain ways. And yet they ask me for advice. I give it to them as suggestions. Advice isn't even the right word, but perhaps you should try this. And they do it for a while, and then they get back into that same cycle. And because this person I love, I get frustrated because I see the pattern. I recognize that they are playing this game with themselves. Ultimately, though, I cannot fix that for them. You can lead a horse to water. And if I allow myself to become angry and frustrated, which generally speaking, from my perspective, if it's with a loved one, it's because we love them. It's because we fear. I come into a place of fear of losing them in this particular reality because they're not taking care of themselves. I get sad because I know that they're in pain. And I've given them all the tools they need. They already have the tools, whether or not I've given them access to remembering their own tools would be a better statement. They don't need me to necessarily access those tools, but I'm helping that. Ultimately, that's it. I've done my job. And then from a bigger perspective, it's not my job. My job is to come back into my own space and create my reality. I could go into so many different layers here. So these are some things I go through as well. And so from my perspective, when that happens, that cycle shows up, it's my responsibility not to fall into the habit pattern of the cycle of losing my flow or frequency because I'm sad or angry at them for for not realizing their potential, for not seeing their habit patterns that are perhaps destructive. This is different for everyone. Of course, if I'm not talking about someone who's causing harm to someone else or who is ultimately doing something that's very detrimental. I'm just using this as a general example across the board of a generalization of energies that we see around us that we just are unable to necessarily fix or change. That can be frustrating. And we can talk about it and say, guys, you don't have to go through this. You don't have to be on a karmic wheel or a karmic cycle. I've been talking about that for years. That doesn't mean I might not work with someone who still believes that they do need to work through karma. It's not for me to tell them, change their mind. You're wrong. Because ultimately, I can express to them that's not my view. I see that as being done. Yet, if a person is continually doing things that creates karma, making choices that hurt others or making choices that are less ethical, well, then so be it. That's the reality they continue to create, and they will then have consequences for their actions. One might say karma. But my point is that, again, we're being called to take a step back and reassess where our own emotions, what's our charge, what's the trigger, what's showing up for us, because this can be our resistance that we're not even recognizing. Oh, there's so many different layers I could go into, so many different angles that we could look at. I think I'll probably go into flow in my next video because this is turning into a long one. The reason I'm bringing this up is this is kind of old patterns and old habits are really these remnants that are hanging on in our reality. And so as teachers, sometimes we get hooked on a habit pattern of seeing others' cycles and patterns, and we're being triggered by it, not recognizing necessarily that once that happens, we are now operating in that habit pattern in reality also. So let me just see where else this is taking us. There's a lot of information that's being shared right now about our history and about Earth and galactic and all of that. And what I was shown essentially is as these stories come up, it can create confusion, self-doubt. Well, I thought this was true, and now I find out it's not. Oh, I'm being called to talk about the soul. This is one of those messages that I realize some people will disagree with, and that is okay. We are not all operating, from my perspective, from the same perspective. So what I see in my reality is not what someone else may see or experiencing in their world or experience. But I had someone that brought up this idea that our souls can be taken. This might be a completely different video. I'm not going to go into all those layers, because what I'm recognizing is as information comes up, we're being shown things that bring more fear. And I really want to share, one of my things that my guides have shared with me is that I can see the light in many people. I can look at someone and see what they really are. Sometimes their version of themselves isn't sunshine and rainbows. And I see this shadow aspect that they've fed for so many years, for so many lifetimes. Therefore, they are now this entity that they've created, or they've given their power over to an energy that is feeding off of their energy. We'll just say that. This can be in the form of a parasite. It can be in the form of what is an entity? An entity to me is an energy that has been created through our own creationary energy or another creationary energy that takes on, what the word that comes through is application, but it's a form. I mean, it may be formless, but it holds a charge. It holds a vibration. If we're continuously, and so the idea is that there's an energy that comes through us, feeds off of us, and that fed that old matrix. I know I'm going really woo-woo here for a moment, but yes. However, if we are all part of the one, and even the shadow is part of source energy, the spirit that moves through all things, and it can provide balance for us in the overall picture, schematic of things, then, and we're infinite beings, we experience time in a space that has gravity. And this is just a very basic perspective. Therefore, in this place where we're experiencing time, there may be energies that feed off of our soul spark, we'll say. And by us giving our power to that entity or energy or frequency, vibration, it gives our power away, and then we end up giving them that energy. But ultimately, once we leave that space, once we move on and leave that time, we go back to the origination of our source, from my perspective. Therefore, all aspects of us return to that source. Therefore, there is no way that our soul can be completely taken from us. And I really felt called to share that, because it doesn't mean I'm encouraging people to do things that would create a separation, because separation in itself is an illusion. But we do separate or create, let's say, density containers by where we direct our energy or don't direct our energy. Therefore, if we are taking action that is feeding a false narrative and causing harm to our bodies and causing harm to someone else, and in a place of anger, fear, blame, shame, hate, that is feeding a particular shape, a particular energy, a particular creation, a particular entity. And if we do that long enough and we are unconscious while we're doing it, then there is an essence of us being separated from who we really are. And so from that perspective, we could say that our soul is then separated from us, but only in the sense of our physical form only in the sense of who that representation is. So to go deeper, perhaps there are people walking around who are zombified, we could say. But once we return back to source, that is no longer true. The reason I'm sharing this is ultimately, from one perspective, we're really being called to get out of the fear entrapment. And that even means the fear of us losing our soul. If we do things and we operate from our heart space, and we create from this higher frequency of love, then that idea is no longer holds truth, because it can't. That can no longer be supported. And so while that, I'm not denying that there is some truth to that concept, ultimately the concept becomes null and void when we step into a higher expression of ourselves, for those entities cannot attach or pull from our field any longer, because we've cut the cord, we've cut the feeding tube, because we're not feeding into this false sense of self. If this makes sense, I'm going into like, it's a multidimensional message that I'm kind of sharing, and I'm seeing so many different things, but the ultimate message is it's time to just leave all of that behind if we choose to, or not. We are responsible for holding on to our soul container. We are responsible for feeding our soul. We are responsible for opening up to the vastness of our soul spark, our soul signature of who we really are. And it is time, from one perspective, to stop giving away that energy. And I see that what happens is there are people who have been mistreated, who have had experiences that have created a disconnect, detachment, it's not even the right word, blockage from who they really are. And it's created a fraction. They've fractionated themselves. And so were we to stop, it immediately stops that feeding tube. And I'm going back to that because that's how I see it. It's like a feeding tube. We do that through here. Once we reconnect here, it disconnects us from these energies that would seek to gain from our sadness, fear, anger, and all of that. And if we're no longer feeding that energy, then those energies can no longer exist. That's simple. So I really wanted to share that from my perspective. When I say it's that simple, obviously, if someone has been feeding into that habitual pattern for so long, they may be unable to disconnect from that. And ultimately, that's their journey. So coming back to our job here to wake everybody up. We can, what is it? You can lead a horse to water. We are the water. We are living light codes here on earth, sharing an experience. And the more we transmit these frequencies, clear out the distortions from our own field, the easier it is for these other individuals who are here, who are locked into a particular system, to begin to feel that vibration. It's like hearing that sound for the first time and going, what is that sound? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? Why do I feel sadness? And all of a sudden, it's those little tiny things that start to open within an individual. And there may be people that we thought that would never open to receive these, that come out of the woodwork and all of a sudden go, Show me. Or don't say show me at all. They just walk through our field and we are reverberating, sending out waves of love. And just that little tickle might be enough to disconnect one little fiber cord to a particular feeding system. I'm being very broad here because, again, there are many different stories about what that looks like, about these entities, about this and that. But I'm just trying to take a step back and say, ultimately, it's all just energy. All it is energetic frequency. Okay, I hope that felt somewhat clear and answered some questions about that. And again, somebody else who teaches this or watches this might say, no, 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 no. Once you do this, you're disconnected. And again, I'm going to come back and say that is true in some cases, but it isn't forever. It isn't infinite. It's not an infinite disconnect because that's impossible. So therefore, rather than focusing on that, perhaps we can focus on what we can connect to, what we have the power to disconnect from, what we have the power to create. Therefore, this collective frequency then like a tuning fork. It's when you tune an instrument, all the other instruments tune with it. So again, it comes back to the basics of, rather than focusing on the distortions that other people are focusing on, or focusing on what we're really wanting to get across as truth, we have to do it from the space of, let me rephrase that. We don't have to do anything, but we're being invited to do it from a place of compassion and, I'm being called to go into that as well. Oof. Coherence. Coherence is neutrality. It isn't we can be excited and passionate about something without judging another person for not understanding what we're talking about, without getting angry at another person for their choices. Because once we accept anger into our reality, that's ours. That's on us to transmute. Where was I going with that? Squirrel. Yeah, coherence versus and compassion. So there is this, again, it's not like, oh, compassion isn't without compassion. Oh, bless your heart. Oh, they're cute. They don't understand, but we do. So we're more special. We're more important. We're the teachers. They're the students. That is a hierarchy. And that is an example of not being in a place of neutrality. And I've said that before, even like, oh, bless their soul. They don't necessarily understand. But are we saying that from, I'm better than them? I know more than they do. They don't understand, therefore they're not going to blah, 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 blah. We don't know what we don't know. That person who might be the most backwards, according to us, person who's been in this inverted system and they're completely plugged into the programs, may all of a sudden in one moment cut that line and be here now. They may not know anything we know. So, all right, I'm going to end on that note and just share this. These are the ahas I had this week among so many others. And I was shown this in my own reality. And therefore, when I process something or when I have this come up in a lot of sessions, I like to share it with you guys, whoever's watching, whoever's tuning in, because obviously I'm not the only one going through this. I'm not the only one seeing this. And when there's multiple people that I'm working with who are sharing this information with me, I recognize that it's a collective experience. So here I am sharing it with you guys. So hope someone found this helpful. And again, this is all my perspective. So I'm not saying that everything I'm sharing is the way it is. There are many ways. So have fun creating in your own way. And in love and light, guys. Namaste.